Reese Warren to the stand. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Please introduce yourself and spell your last name for the record.
Yes, my name is Reese Warren. Warren is spelled W-A-R-R-E-N.
Mr. Warren, what do you do for a living?
Well, I'm the professor and chair of the Department of Linguistics at Midland State University. As well, in the past I have worked closely with the Midland State Police Academy in instructing their cadets and law enforcement officers on the collection of testimony during covert operations.
Well, what exactly is linguistics?
Linguistics is the study of language and the flow of conversations.
So what are some of your responsibilities as a linguist?
Well, I work closely with forensic psychologists in order to determine how what you say during the course of a conversation affects both the listeners and the flow of the conversation itself.
What kind of education do you have to be able to work as a linguist?
I received my Bachelor's of Science in Linguistics from the University of Northern Carolina, as well as my PhD from the University of, Georgetown, in our nation's great capital.
What experience do you have in your field?
Well, I've published over 37 peer-reviewed articles, all of which have occurred in both linguistics and psychology journals. And I've also been retained in 23 different cases in which the defense has alleged entrapment. And my text, How to Talk to Alleged Criminals, is also standard text at the Midland State Police Academy.
Well, how exactly does a linguist relate to undercover work?
Well, depending on how the undercover operative structures certain conversations, it can affect on whether or not a suspect was induced to commit a criminal activity or not.
So how are you involved in today's case?
Originally, I was retained by the defense. The defense retained my services for a flat rate of $10,000 to provide an analysis on whether or not the actions of the Midland State Police Department rose to the level of entrapment. After I provided my conclusions, in which the police acted reasonably, they told me my services would no longer be needed. Following that, I was retained by the state in order to testify here in court today, and I am receiving an additional $500 in compensation for that.
Okay, now to reach your conclusion, did you have reliable facts and data to come to your conclusion?
Certainly. I was provided with a tape of a March 31st conversation between casino owner Avery Bancroft, Midland's Gambling Commission Chair Chase Covington, Avery Bancroft's executive assistant Corey Hyde, as well as undercover investigator Mickey Keenan.
Was this all the facts and data that you used to come to your conclusion?
I was also provided with an email, a March 30th email exchange between Officer Keenan and the executive assistant Corey Hyde.
Now, did you use those facts and data, did you apply them to the principles and methods?
Yes, certainly. I applied those facts and data to the best practices agreed upon by linguists as to the structuring of conversation between undercover investigators and their suspects during covert operations.
What exactly are these best practices?
Well, when you're structuring a conversation with a suspect in the purpose of gathering testimony and evidence, you're supposed to begin by asking open-ended questions in order so that the target may implicate themselves in criminal activity. And you are also supposed to provide subtle hints of criminal activity so that the suspect may latch onto these and further incriminate themselves. If the criminal activity has already occurred, you may ask the suspect to recount a story in which they further implicate themselves. And should all of this fail, ask a simple, clear, unambiguous question as to whether or not the target was willing to engage in criminal conduct.
Okay, so did you use those best practice and apply those to the facts and data that you were supplied with?
Absolutely. These are the methods that I teach both my students in the classroom as well as cadets and law enforcement officers. It'd be a little hypocritical of me if I were not to use these.
Okay, so how did you begin your analysis in today's case?
Well, I began with a transcript analysis of the March 31st conversation, in which I determined that Officer Mickey Keenan and Corey Hyde both initiated the conversation with such open-ended questions, which do indeed fall in line with the best practices of undercover investigations.
Is this all that you found out during your analysis?
No, I actually also performed a second analysis in which I determined whether or not Mickey Keenan and Corey Hyde limited their use of conversational strategies shown to induce criminal behavior in suspects. Or, in other words, whether or not what Mickey Keenan and Corey Hyde said would coerce Avery Bancroft into committing a bribe.
You just mentioned conversational strategies. Please explain to the jury what these strategies are.
Yes, during my analyses, I focused on the 10 most important. Those being interrupting the target, speaking on behalf of the target, using ambiguous language, manipulating the tape, controlling the flow of conversation, using ambiguous responses from the target as yes, inaccurately restating the target's answers, outright lying to the target, coaching of informants, and, and outright lying to the target again.
Now, when it came to these strategies, did you see those applied with Mickey Keenan?
For the most part, I actually observed the fact that Mickey Keenan and Corey Hyde both avoided the use of these limited strategies. There were only 4 cases of these strategies.
Objection, improper opinion.
What is the objection?
Improper opinion.
In what way is that?
This witness, Reese Warren, was hired to investigate Mickey Keenan's conversational strategies. However, he's also talking about Corey Hyde's conversational strategies.
Response?
Yes, Your Honor. In today's case, this expert witness was allowed to look over Hyde's and Keenan's both of their affidavits and their email exchange, and in the transcript that he looked over, Hyde was also present, Your Honor. This witness is just stating what he found in that information that he was supplied with, and Hyde's testimony was also in that the research that he looked over.
Do you have a response?
Yes, Your Honor. He could talk about what he found about Mickey Keenan and the conclusions he came to about Mickey Keenan. However, he cannot make any conclusions about Corey Hyde because that is not what he was hired to do so for. Therefore, it is not relevant.
Do you agree that this expert has the expertise to testify about what Mickey Keenan said?
Yes.
So wouldn't he have that same expertise to testify to what someone else would say too?
However, he was only hired to look at the conversational strategies by Mickey Keenan. He was not hired to look at the conversational strategies used by Corey Hyde.
I'm going to allow the testimony. If you want to go into that on cross-exam, feel free to do so. Overruled.
Please finish your answer.
All right. Excuse me, what was the question one more time?
How did these conversational strategies apply to Mickey Keenan and Corey Hyde?
Yes. The Mickey Keenan and Corey Hyde only used 4 of these cases, and the extent to which they were used was limited in scope.
You said they only used 4. As a linguist, is this good or bad?
Certainly using less is preferable. However, this is not unreasonable in terms of linguistics.
Now, were you able to come to a conclusion based upon your a degree of professional certainty in today's case?
Yes, as a matter of fact, I was. In terms of the transcript of the March 31st conversation, as well as the email exchange, I was able to actually draw 2 conclusions. The first of which was that Officer Keenan and Corey Hyde followed best practices when structuring their conversation with a suspect during a covert operation. My second conclusion was that they did indeed limit their use of conversational strategies shown to induce criminal activity within their suspects.
Thank you. At this time, I have no further questions.
Thank you. Cross-exam.
Good afternoon, Mr. Warren.
Good afternoon, Miss.
I want to talk to you about the information you viewed in today's case. You never talked to defendant, isn't that correct?
I never did talk to the defendant.
You reviewed a tape recording, isn't that correct?
Yes, I did review the tape recording and the email exchange from March 30th between Officer Keenan and Corey Hyde.
And you also reviewed affidavits of Mickey Keenan and Corey Hyde, isn't that right?
That is correct.
However, you never reviewed any of the evidence mentioned in these affidavits, isn't that right?
These affidavits, while I'm not familiar with I was not provided
Can you
with
please
the
answer that with a yes or no?
That would be correct.
Thank you. Now, I want to talk to you about the tape recording. During the tape recording, there were 3 voices on this, isn't that right?
That would be correct.
One was Corey Hyde,
Yes,
Avery Bancroft,
that would be correct.
and Mickey Keenan.
That would be correct.
Would you say that they might have been all talking at the same time?
Everything that was included within the transcript was from a clear and unaltered voice, something that was certainly capable of being heard. That is part of the transcript analysis. So everything within the transcript was clearly understood and clearly recognizable as to whose voice it would be attributed to.
However, would you say that it was so clear that there are no interruptions in the transcript?
It is actually clear that the recording was indeed recorded in one single tape, if that is what you are asking.
I'll rephrase my question. Were there any interruptions during the tape recording?
There was one moment of static.
Did you find any other interruptions during the conversation?
If you were talking about the actual interruption between people, there were 2 instances of interruption between the conversationalists.
Because of these interruptions, there could be errors in the transcript you provided in this case. Isn't that right?
It was certainly clear who was doing the interruptions.
However, is it in your testimony today that there could be no errors in the transcript?
There are some possible errors within the transcript in regards to what occurred during the static, yes.
All right, I want to move on and talk more about the conversation. During this conversation, you could only report what you heard, isn't that right?
That would be correct.
So you wouldn't know if anyone nodded
I cannot discern that from an audio recording.
or if anyone signaled,
Again, I can also not discern that from an audio recording.
or if anyone pushed a napkin across the table.
That was not apparent from the tape.
Just to make it clear for the jury, there could be errors in this transcript, isn't that right?
Objection, asked and answered.
I'm not allowed to go.
Dr. Warren, just to clarify for the jury, there could be errors in this transcript, isn't that correct?
There could certainly be aspects of the conversation that were not on the tape.
Thank you. No further questions.